Am I Mental is a live podcast, and as such, we start each episode with a 5-minute instrumental to allow people to join the chat room and not miss the beginning of our actual broadcast. If you are listening to this after it has been aired, feel free to skip ahead to the 5-minute and 30-second mark in order to pick up the episode. Otherwise, if you like instrumentals, enjoy. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences. These are real people sharing very real, deeply personal experiences. This content may be considered triggering for others and for those who are sharing. The chat room is a privilege intended for discussions and sharing. You are not being asked to agree, but you are being asked to stay civil and refrain from personal attacks. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Am I Mental? A live podcast where real people share stories about how life impacts mental health and how mental health impacts life. I'm your host, E. With us, as always, is our co-host, Oz.
What's up, Am I Mental fam?
And welcome back to the new year. Got a couple of really awesome guests lined up. Have had some success, during this little break that we had for the holidays. So yeah, definitely want to keep checking in with us. We're doing really great with that stuff. Donations are picking up, so thank you everyone that's been donating. We will start some advertising campaigns here because of it. We actually getting a little liquidity there, which is awesome. And there are some big things. We got some irons in the fire. We got some things planned. Some good things are coming. In the meantime, if you do want to help us out, feel free to do so by going to amimental.net/donate. There's a number of ways that you can donate there. We also have some merchandise with the Teespring store, or Spring Tea, whichever it was. I can't remember anymore. Spring Tea. Go check it out. We have hoodies, we have stickers, we have t-shirts. If there's anything that you'd like us to make, we'll make it. No problem. Now, without further ado, we have our guest, Nick. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Greetings. Good to be back. My name is Nick. I live in the Citrus Heights area, Sacramento, Northern California. I was on this podcast one other time, sort of just talking about some of the, just some of the obstacles that have been, the story of my life. And I am happy to be back and happy to, talk further about what things that have transpired since last podcast. And it has been an interesting road involving a lot of growth.
Yeah, I mean, you basically had life just shit on you. Let's be honest. At one point.
That would be perceivably one way. Yeah, you could certainly say that and be safe.
All right, how would you say it?
Well, since the last podcast, my wife became pregnant with my child, and there were some things that maybe we'll get into in a minute, but along that road of that pregnancy, what ended up happening on Thanksgiving of 2021 is that our daughter was stillborn. She was on time, and she was born dead.
That's just awful.
Never opened her eyes, never. To make matters even more variable is we did a home birth, and our midwife, there's still sort of some legal stuff in the air, so I will obviously not mention her name, but she was a little bit wrapped up in what she had going on with her family on Thanksgiving, and she didn't show up.
Oh, shit.
And so I ended up delivering my daughter, and she was dead. She was whatever in whatever belief system you want to call it. I mean, she was born without a breath.
Damn.
There's nothing in life that can prepare you for that.
No,
It's supposed to
no.
be one of the most joyous events of your life.
Yeah. And I got to say, the immediate, I would say, which was everybody else's, honestly, except for my wife and I, everybody's immediate reaction was what a monster this woman is, this individual is for not showing up to do her duty. And I would agree on one hand. However, the reality is this: had that woman been there, nothing would have been different.
Right.
So that's the reality of it. I mean, our daughter perceivably passed in the womb before labor began. My wife mentioned that she did know, she was a little bit concerned about a day or so beforehand, and she wasn't. Maya Lila was our daughter's name, is our daughter's name, and she had noticed a lot less movement and a lot less station, and she was, she had brought it up to me, and we just figured that maybe it was about to happen. Sometimes that the less kicking again, that means that, the amniotic sac has perhaps punctured and that the process has begun sometimes.
Yeah.
And so we were a little bit, we were like, oh, wow. But we did not obviously expect what was to be, who would. Do I still got you guys? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we're still here.
And yeah, so this thing was happening then. The midwife was not coming, and there was a little, little dark hair coming through the portal, and it was time to deliver the baby. And I don't, I didn't know what all went into delivering a baby, but I'll tell you this much: it's a fairly straightforward process.
Yeah, if everything's lined up the right way, it's a fairly straightforward process. It's when things aren't lined up that's when the problems begin.
Yeah, I played ball growing up, and it was sort of like having a football hiked to you.
In slow motion. Yeah.
Yeah. With a lot different visual sensation in front of you than just the center hiking you the football, So a wild experience. And then, boy, that fighter, this is an Am I Mental podcast, so I must assume that anybody involved understands the like bell ringing sensation of that like fight or flight moment that when it arises, it's just, it's probably, the fight or flight situation I is one of the only times that I think I ever there's nothing else to focus on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just, she's out and she's not breathing or crying, and her eyes are not opening, and it's, oh my gosh, I'm fortunately trained in CPR and infant CPR, and so I did what I know how to do, and it was non-responsive, and we had a doula as well. She's on the phone with the cops, and 911, I should say.
Right. Emergency services.
I'll tell you what. I'll just a quick side note. I have had a varied opinion of law enforcement throughout my life, based upon my choices. 98% of it. Those cops, these were there. I could not believe how fast they got there. They were there so fast. And
well, if you know Citrus Heights police, you know that they are Johnny on the spot.
Yeah, and I appreciate them. They, you gotta think from these guys' perspective. This is a home birth. It's an unorthodox situation, any way you cut it. These guys come in the house. There's a woman in the back room, cord attached, baby, blood. There's a guy in the house with blood all around his mouth from attempting to administer CPR to the child. God only knows what they thought was going on. They gave me a couple of really wild looks. And these guys, I'll tell you what, the cooperated effort of these officers and I, just to try and make something happen with the training that we had as the EMTs arrived. When those two officers, younger than I, when they walked out of the apartment, I had tears in my eye, and I was just like, thank you, thank you so much. I'm sorry that you've had to experience this today, but thank you, so much. And they just looked at me like, these guys' eyes were glassy and, moving. These guys were shook up as they walked out. And I just, bless them. Well, the EMTs.
I was going to say EMTs and firefighters, they're more used to seeing that kind of stuff because they tend to respond to medical. For officers, they're usually more law enforcement, not necessarily medical, even though they can. That's not their forte. So I can imagine that they walked into a situation where just like, what the fuck are we seeing?
Yeah, I mean, people in Leo see the worst of humanity.
Go
on
ahead.
A regular basis. Oh yeah, no, I was saying that law enforcement sees the worst of humanity on a regular basis. But like I was saying earlier, like nothing, I don't care how professional you are, nothing's going to prepare you for that. As a parent going through it, or as somebody who's there to help, people and being powerless in that, where I'm sure the feeling of powerlessness, must have been insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that a lot of people don't know, I mean, I don't even know if you know. Not a lot of people know Citrus Heights, but Citrus Heights, they take a lot of their policing cues and how they do things from Dallas. And one of the big things at Dallas is community policing. Over 70% of the Citrus Heights police force lives in Citrus Heights.
Yeah, correct.
That way they feel they have more vested in making sure that this is a great community. And it's harder to be a dick to your neighbor, when you are off the clock, and now they're just your neighbor. So
yeah, when you're gonna be a dick to somebody, but then you see them while you're out buying milk,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a great way of doing things. I'm no professional in this, but it's having lived here for as long as I have, I could say that the police here, they're no bullshit. They do not mess around. They will come down on you with the thunder when they need to, but at the same time, they're very aware that this is where they live. They sleep here too, so they don't tend to shit on it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the guys personally. I support them. You notice, I don't know if you noticed, but you walk around Citrus Heights and there are some, homeless people, like, that live outside and whatnot, or I don't know if they're homeless or, there's sort of like it's sort of a gray area nowadays. I think ever since, a lot of people have been displaced since, the pandemic and whatnot. And if you notice, like the homeless people in Citrus Heights don't even come up and ask you for change.
No, they usually kind of just sit where they are. And if you could donate, you could donate. Yeah, they're very passive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's self-preservation. Speaking with some homeless people, they learn where they can panhandle and where they can't, and how to do it. They know if they're going to be harassing people, they're going to be swept out, real quick. But
yeah.
What was your experience like in the days following that? I couldn't even imagine.
Well, they took my wife and the baby out on a stretcher, and we went to the hospital, and my wife was upstairs being taken care of, and I drove myself. They wanted me to ride with them. I was like, look, I get it. I appreciate it. I can drive my vehicle. I'm just going to drive myself. And I drove down there and followed the ambulance. And, I was the one who got to, it was wild. I walked into the room where they were doing what they could. And it was wild, man. You walk into this room and there's almost like there's like this altar. There's this altar in the middle of the room with all these, medical professionals gathered around it. And one individual, the guy I don't envy his job, is the one who walked over to me, and he had his clipboard, and he said what he was doing was he was reading off a list of what they had done, preventative measures they had taken. And I got to tell you, I already knew by the second thing he said on the list what he was getting ready to tell me. And I stopped him, and I grabbed his arm. I just said, "It's okay, man. I know. I get it." I get it. And, I had a feeling. I kind of got it. I kind of already knew, on the drive over there. And I just knew that this was going to be a different kind of gift. This was going to be a different kind of gift.
That's right there really, I think, says a lot about you as a person. So few people, so few people would call this a gift.
Yeah,
I understand. Yeah,
the perspective on life you must have to be able to look at it in that light.
See why I love this guy?
Yeah, for sure. It's pretty heavy. How is it supporting your wife through it?
Well,
because you're going through it right along with her.
My wife is.
And if you don't want to talk about your wife for her privacy, it's totally fine.
I am. I stand before you a naked man.
You? No, sorry.
You can't pants, right?
Well, I do all my podcasts without pants. I wear shorts.
Good, man.
No, but yeah, it's definitely like what
my wife is. My wife, my mother, and my grandmother are just the three women that I have the utmost respect for. At least, I not that I I'm gonna rate one woman next to another, or any individual really next to another. However, I'm partial to these three, and one thing I would say about my wife is she has very strong emotions, and she's very intensely, intimately connected to all of our children, even our oldest son, who is biologically not her own.
How many kids do you have?
4. 5 if you count the angel.
Yeah.
And I went upstairs where they were operating on her, and I got to be the one to break the news to my wife. And I think she had a fairly decent idea already, and it the next couple, it was on Thanksgiving, to make matters even more ironic, and my wife and I have been very close. We've been close even through some difficult times, primarily inflicted by my selfishness and just, sort of flaws. And the 2 weeks that followed after that was just, it like concreted this whole new foundation in my wife and I's relationship, friendship, marriage, and just everything. It was so painful, it was just so mind-numbingly painful, and it brought us so close.
Imagine it either go that direction. It would either bring you closer or completely tear you apart. I don't see in that situation there being much of a middle ground.
Same.
And yeah, I'm glad that it was able to strengthen what sounds like was already a really strong bond to begin with, and make it stronger. Yeah.
It has been. This is a woman who's stood by me after I've, locked up for taking the law into my own hand, honestly, and some violence ensued, like just some stuff that was totally unnecessary. That for whatever reason I felt inclined to participate in. And, she's just been there. She's been there. I was sent away to rehab at one point, sort of, I'd probably unjust, like probably not, probably shouldn't have been. I mean, I don't know how much good it did, but she, this is a woman who, she's that woman,
She's been your battle buddy for a long time.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, she sounds like your ride or die.
Ride or die. Yes, sir.
So what did the healing process look like for you guys? I imagine you're still in it. Something that tragic happens. Did you seek out professional help for that? Were you just surrounded by a support group of friends and family? Was it just you and your wife? How did you come to terms and not? What are some of the things that you two did together that where you didn't both slide downhill and self-destruct together?
Let me see here. That's a good question. Looked a little different from both ends. I am my wife, Alexandra. Lots of communication, lots of with other her girlfriends, and lots of just reading, lots of learning, lots of taking in useful just useful currents of wisdom and knowledge. And she's still sort of to this day, there's a happy ending. We've had another son since then. He's
awesome.
A couple old right now. His name is Hiram. He's upstairs right now. So just, that was sort of, it's not a replacement kid, but it certainly, I think, justified and validated a lot of what happened for my wife.
Yeah.
But lots of studious. We never did seek any professional help, but lots of studious sort of learning and growth on my wife's heart, in my wife's heart and in her life, in regards to healing from this occurrence. I withdrew for several months. I started, I used sort of not like any like hardcore narcotics or anything, but I was using, some cannabis and some other legal sort of herbal concoctions that kind of numbed out some of the pain. And what I did during that time was just a lot of chewing and digesting.
Mm-hmm.
I
ended up. You have to go to a really vulnerable place to be able to come back. Especially hearing the great news that you had another child after that, to be able to have the confidence behind that, because that's a bridge that I think a lot of people would be really scared to try to cross, because like you're talking about fight or flight earlier, like the possibility of having to go through that a second time in life would scare, I think, the vast majority of us away.
Sure. Yeah, it was, people thought we were nuts. Yeah. It wasn't an intentional, it was just happening. Like I said, real close to the event. And, it just, it wasn't maybe hell 2.5 months, I believe, we discovered that she was pregnant again.
Mhm.
I now have
What was that? What was that news like for you? So soon after that event. I gotta imagine there's a lot of joy and fear mixed in all at the same time. But
I laughed. I just like sometimes you laugh not because it's funny, just because
yeah,
it's just the epitome of irony.
yeah,
I mean, it is the root of irony. Um, it was more so like, our stance on it ultimately was that we wanted to spare. You know what the reality, just a side note, is that everybody else kind of took this thing harder than we did. I don't know if that might not make sense. Everybody else was really concerned for us, and I understand
yeah.
why. Um, However, we always seemed to be in a much more resilient space than people assumed or gathered. There was calls I got from my mother. There was calls she got from people where they were just like, "Oh God, I just can't imagine the pain and the torment you must be going through." And I was like, yeah, it hurts. We're enduring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very resilient.
And that kind of blew me
I
away.
can only imagine.
I was just saying that kind of blew me away when I found out about what happened, and you were just like you're taking it in stride, yeah, and you're like, yeah, like you said, it hurts. We're dealing with it.
I imagine that being in the sphere of something like that happens. I've always told people like knowing the worst is better than not knowing anything because so much is left to imagination. So where you and your wife have been through it firsthand accounts, you know everything, you've experienced it firsthand. The people who are around you, who love you and care for you and your family, are just imagining the absolute worst because they don't know. They can never be in your shoes. Well, hopefully they're never in your shoes, you know. And different people are able to process things in different ways. Um, so where that concern comes from, um, like not gonna lie, when he told me that he wanted to talk about the subject with you, I was like, oh shit, okay, this is gonna be super heavy. Let's see where this goes, and where you're like, this is
we've already had a
and
moment.
your approach is like, this is life. Yeah, we have, and life sucks, and we deal with life as it comes. Is kind of the feeling I'm getting from you. Like, you can let it crush you, or you can use it as a tool for growth, however you can, and don't let it define you. Which I think is so far the message I'm getting from you, which is pretty big.
And I just want to grab really fast from the chat. Kat was saying, "I'm glad you and your wife are able to have another baby." And Sarah asked a great question. So if you want to actually respond to us now, I'll save the question for after.
Whichever.
Okay. So Sarah asked...
I realized that Os's was in the form of a question. I apologize.
Well, it was a statement. I was just wondering if you wanted to respond to it.
Yeah.
So Sarah asked, was there a time when one of you was ready to talk or connect and the other one needed to withdraw? I have a follow-up question on that, and it's like, and how did you handle that?
There have been plenty of times in which I could have been a better recipient of what my wife was sharing. And what I mean by that is, I'm not really big on, a man's job versus a woman's job, However, I think that a lot of times, as in my position as dad, husband, the guy who brings the income home, a lot of times the tendency of individuals maybe similar to I is that we like to find the solution or fix. A lot of times, my wife does not require me to fix or repair what is going on with her. A lot of times, my wife just what she needs from me is for me to listen and then to acknowledge.
Yeah,
that's like married to my girlfriend.
I was gonna say that's a big fight between my wife and me. Is that she wants to be heard, not fix.
Yeah, it's been a big, many topics of conversation with Sarah and I, where basically her message is like, sometimes I just need you to shut the fuck up and listen. Like, and I'm like, it's not in my programming.
So
same. It's something that I'm trying to learn. So I'm definitely trying to learn.
What I've done, what I'm doing now is I've taken a commitment of, when my wife comes to me, when I have that knee jerk, I need to fix it, I'm going to ask, do you need me to fix something, or do you need me to listen?
Yeah.
No, buddy, man. So get this. A lot of times, I'll be talking, I read a lot. I don't do so. I mean, let me forget about what I don't do. What I do is I read a lot. I love to learn. I just love to take in new stuff, be it political, scientific, absolutely non-scientific, like occult, spirit, astral, like whatever it is, I'm into all of it, and I just love the opportunity to exist in this realm.
Dude, you are singing my song right now. If you can see me on the video, I'm cheering you on this.
Yeah.
Richard says words of wisdom.
So what's funny is, I'll be talking to my wife about, I'll catch some, like, I'll be watching or listening to some like Rudolf Steiner lecture, or just something like way, way far out there. And I'll be like, and my wife will be doing what I ought to do a lot of the time, and she'll just be listening. And I'm like, are you gonna fucking say anything? Like, so she's just listening. I mean, she's treating me as she'd like to be treated, ultimately.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a funny thing. Like, that's, it took me. I'm like, hello, are you in there?
The lesson our significant others try to teach us through action. I personally need to get better about learning them. But Sarah does the same thing for me.
Unfortunately, what I get when I start doing that thing, like, I'll watch something like, say, Casual Geographic, and it's some really cool animal fact that I'm like, that's cool. And I go up to my phone, I'm like, hey, did you know? Blah, 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 blah. And it's just like glass over. Just no care. It's like, fine.
Yeah. Did you know that the purple dye that the Phoenicians were so famous for spreading throughout the world to the royals of the time came from the sea snail that was only in the Mediterranean Sea? She's like, who the fuck are the Phoenicians? You know what I mean?
Like, don't you do history?
So yeah, man. But to answer, I believe it was Kat's question, have been times where my wife had said, this happened today and it made me think of Maya. And and this is, I mean, you guys, there may be a pitchfork and lantern mob, but torch and pitchfork mob, but inside, of course, I mean, this is internal only. Inside, part of me is kind of like, come on, honey, it's been a year. You know what I mean? So, but what I get to learn from that when she shares that with me is I get to instead, and that's just me being transparent. I don't know what to tell you. I get this thing. I became grateful for it a lot faster than she did. Mm-hmm. And so what I get to learn from that is that, like, this is this has changed her life in an entirely different way than it has changed mine. You know, she has been like moved into a different person since this thing, you know, and I would say the same for myself. It's just sort of like it's a different sort of transition. It has been a different evolution for both of us having had this experience.
Yeah, Sarah commented and said, "Sounds like your spiritual perspective drove a lot of that resilience too."
Yeah, I don't know what happened with the spirit and I, but that was one thing that one thing that I've seemingly always sort of been imbued with, even since a very young child, was a very strong sense of the presence of the spirit and, you know, the soul, and the fact that there are just that what we see and what we perceive with our baser senses is very, there's people that say that it's not real and it's just sort of like an Indra's net type situation. And I would subscribe to that to an extent. However, I think that it's what's happening here in the physical realm, material realm, is very much real. However, I've always had a very strong inclination that it is the product of something that we are not seeing and not maybe naturally perceiving.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Same.
Sarah also had another comment.
I was going to say it. Go for
it. In regards to the amount of time that it took for your healing process versus your wife taking longer. And she said sometimes a woman carries a lot of guilt for those kinds of things too, as the physical builder, and shelter the baby, it could change the timeline.
Let me share something with you. I'm going to, so our first two children were C-section. Okay. If you know anything about when a woman delivers a child via C-section, they typically do not, especially if you're having the baby at the hospital, they do not want to do what is called a VBAC, which is where you go from having a cesarean delivery to a vaginal delivery. They don't want to do it. It's been done. Mm-hmm. It's been done. It's been done. It's been done. It's been done. 5 times I said that. But they don't, just based upon they don't want to, the last thing that they want to do is have a complication with a birth. And so if they can prevent that, and they've got you've done 2 C-sections and they were successful, why are we going to risk this? Which I must tell you was very much, I stressed the same to my wife the entire pregnancy. And ultimately, this is her body. This is her. I went as far as I felt was my place to go, and I left the rest in her hands and in the hands of what is higher than I. And so obviously nobody ever said well, you should have got a C-section, dumbass. You know what I mean?
And that wouldn't have changed anything.
That is not the way that but I must imagine that somewhere within the individual, I can only imagine that there is an unspoken of because she fought tooth and nail to do this home birth. We could not afford this home birth. And it just ended up working out to where we were able to make it so that she could do this, just to, I think that's a great comment. The guilt. I don't know her level of guilt. But yeah, I mean, how could you not? Man, selfishly speaking, you got to imagine when this happened and I'm the guy who delivered the child. I mean, this is the only thing that could have been harder. So selfishly speaking for myself, the only thing that could have been harder, let me speak for us first. I think that what would have been more painful and more difficult is if Maya Lila had been born and been breathing and then had passed after life.
Yeah.
The fact that she was born non-material consciousness, that prevented me from needing to blame myself for not delivering her properly, not taking the proper course of action. Could I have done more? Could I have done better? Could I have done different? I was spared of a lot of potential, guilt, shame. And so I
was thinking along those lines. I was thinking the same thing for your wife, where she fought for the home birth versus C-section. Given the circumstance, it doesn't sound like it would have changed anything.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it seems like, well, yeah, I mean, unless they had scheduled it before, I don't know, man, it seems like she died about a day or so before. Our last son, they scheduled the C-section about a week or so. I don't know. It's irrelevant, I guess, it's irrelevant.
Yeah. I
think that it all is sort of minutia that would distract from the fact that what happened is, and what happened, I believe, was exactly what was intended to happen. That's what I believe. Could I go back in time, guys? I can't tell you that I would have changed anything, that I would change anything about what happened. I can't tell you that that's I don't know, I don't know if I would or not, but I just don't. I think that what happened has maintained a very unique image of beauty, that very complex thing to try and articulate.
Well, from an outsider, I was going to say, from an outsider's
Native American languages, I guarantee you there's probably one or two words you can say that describes what I'm trying to articulate. In our language, however, I just don't think that type of context exists.
So what I was going to say was, from an outsider's perspective, if, say, you had the C-section instead, and say it was scheduled a week before when the delivery happened, you have your daughter. You don't have this closer bond with your wife that you have now. Maybe you don't have your son. Maybe you don't have the other self-discovery things that you've been going through since this happened. And you are, even though you have your daughter, you might actually be worse off than where you are right now, all things considering.
It's a lot of what ifs.
It is.
Is there anything new that you learned about yourself through this process that you weren't aware of, or life lessons that you can really, vocalize? Because I'm sure there's a lot that was learned, along the way.
Really fast, we're having some pretty close downstrikes here right now. So if all of a sudden I'm gone, we lost power.
Copy that. Yeah, there is what hasn't been developed and whatnot since then is the question. I have had the very peculiar pleasure of looking back through my life at different things that have happened, and there's guys that I have been in the past with whom I hardly identify much with. And the individual that delivered that baby was a different man. If there's any, I don't know that there's a whole lot more. We had aside from Hiram, our most recent son, being born, one thing that was a great blessing was that, we had our daughter cremated, mostly due to financial reasons. Okay. And what ended up getting to happen is that my wife, I was able to send her on this like all women's retreat to Hawaii with like her girlfriends from the yoga studio. And what she got to do was this just whole, like, you know, bunch of women like butt naked in the Hawaiian, in the Pacific Ocean, like releasing the ashes out into the sea, like just the full force
closure.
like, yeah,
like major closure.
Yeah.
And
there's power in those groups. Our last guest was talking about how they went to a group, and it was a male, and he went to a men's group, and the things he was able to gather from it.
Yeah, and she got to, you know, she has a very strong affinity with the islands. She has some sort of like, you know, back a few generations Polynesian, you know, roots, and our son Hiram's middle name is Kaleo, for that reason. And that's sort of like, that is sort of the cosmic presence of our daughter within him, you know, just based upon the release into the Pacific out there, and just a way for her to live on, not only in spirit, but also to join us in a sense in the material world.
And
So
I'd say you should invite your wife on right now, but she's busy wrangling the kids.
Oh yeah, you guys ought to have her on the show. Really,
let's do it. If she's down, let's do it. We'd love to get her perspective.
Yeah, she's a good time. She's got all kinds of insanity and pain and things that she has endured and become stronger from, and outside of even this situation. So,
taking it back a little bit, you were talking about your healing process. You said that you're an avid reader, and you were reading a lot back then. Is there any specific reading material that comes to mind that you found helpful?
Well, I read all spiritual and theological scripture. I study from the Quran to the Old and New Testament to the Bhagavad Gita, you know, the Vedic text from India. I mean, everything and anything. I mostly read like kind of spiritual, seems like sort of either spiritual / like occult. And by occult, I don't mean like black magic and worshiping Satan and stuff. By occult, I just mean, you know, whereas we have a physical scientific side of existence, we also have an ethereal and, you know, non-material side of existence. You know, my grandfather was a Mason. I won't say any more than that. So yeah, I study a lot of stuff. Some of my current favorite people to listen to or read are Rudolf Steiner, Jordan Peterson. There's this guy Moji, Mooji, and he's a guy from Jamaica. Just kind of, you know, I don't really think he has a denomination or anything that he necessarily corresponds to. However, he just has stuff that hits, you know, sort of just truths, you know.
There wasn't anything specifically topical. You were just doing a lot of spiritual and theology, basic theology. Is that the right word for it?
Yes.
I'm a big time physical science, like physics, science, math, all the sciences that, you know, the scientifically minded individual. I love all of that. That's a big part of my life.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of what you read, you're finding the life lessons, not necessarily specifically within the texting, if A happens, do B, but applying what you've read to your life to give you a better understanding, you know, of yourself and the world around you.
Yeah. I like 1 + 1 = 2, and then I like 1 + 1 = 3 also.
I feel that. I definitely feel that.
You know, because look, like if let's say everything that happens, if you think about, I mean, it is the enormous amount of impulses and just interactions that happen just from like walking down the street, walking past another individual, catching eye contact and saying hello. There is so many different things that have happened. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's just so much that goes into, seemingly, I believe, even the most mundane of things, you know?
I mean, there's
Yeah.
infinite
Yeah,
possibilities.
it's like the butterfly effect, right?
Exactly.
It's the smallest things. Noticing something out of the corner of your eye can impact your thoughts 2 days later and help you in that situation. You know, just because you experience that flutter in your peripheral vision.
Hell,
You know,
I had
all things are connected.
I had a bad day at work and I wrote an essay, and this podcast came of it.
Yeah.
But
Dude, let me share this. This is kind of a funny thing. I'm a member of I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's like, you know, if you have alcoholism, if you've come to the conclusion that you have alcoholism, it's a good place, it's really a book, but it's also a good place, a program to develop as a person, you know, because if you are imparted with the disease of alcoholism, there is really a different skill set that an individual must begin to adapt and impart in their life if one is to get anywhere past something that just is kind of like tripping over your shoelaces over and over. And at an AA meeting recently, I was sharing a day that had happened, and it was the most unusual. It's not really that unusual because a lot of stuff like this seems to happen in my life. But, you know, I was up early. We get up really early, freakishly early, seemingly to some people. But we're up before the sun. You know, the kids are up. Everybody's up. Like, my uncle, an uncle of mine that I loved very, very dearly, died recently. He was a logger from Montana area, just a badass guy, you know, logger, just the nicest guy. And he passed recently, and we were not able to go out to Arizona to his funeral. And so I was a little bit, no, it wasn't like devastating that I didn't get to go to his funeral, you know, but I wished that I had been there. I was not, you know, pumped on being absent from it. So I ended up catching it on YouTube. How I ended up catching it on YouTube is interesting. I must have been over at my grandmother's house here in Citrus Heights, printing something or, you know, doing something on the computer over there to where I was logged into my Google account. And so since then, my grandmother and her husband have watched Uncle Bill's funeral on YouTube. And I didn't log out, I guess, of my Google account. So I'm flipping through YouTube early in the morning, looking for something totally unrelated. And looking through my history, trying to find this video that I had meant to watch again. And I'm looking at this, William Van celebration of life. And I thought, holy smokes, that's Uncle Bill's funeral. And so we sit around and we're watching the funeral. We got to watch the funeral, you know, and I didn't have much going on that day. And just kind of hearing some of the stories about Uncle Bill, I decided that I was going to go out and, you know, they didn't have much going on that day. We're not hurting for money, but I figured I'd just go out and kind of see if I could make something happen that day. Lots of rain recently, lots of storms. I figured that there's got to be a lot of fences down, you know. There's a fence, you know, right down here on Auburn. There's that fence company. It's if you're headed toward,
they have that cool facade on their building.
Yeah. So I go down there and I pop in, and I end up shooting. It ends up not even really an interview. I end up just basically talking shop. I do a lot of carpentry and fence building. I've especially built a lot of wood fences, and end up just kind of talking shop with the owner, and he offers me a position as basically like a supervisor, where I'm going to have guys working under me when he needs a residential fence built, and I just kind of show up and, keep the job articulated properly and, make sure the fence gets built. And these guys do all the hard work, and I, get paid on the day for it. So, that was, it was like, wow, good thing I decided to head out into the world today. The one unusual thing that I would have never seen the funeral if I hadn't gone over there and forgotten to log out of my Google account. Now I'm over here at the fence company, picking up this really cool side opportunity. I have a different job that I'm invested in, and so leaving the fence company, thinking of Uncle Bill, my other uncle happens to be buried over here at the cemetery across the street. And I said, heck, why not pull in and visit Uncle Spike? So I go in and, I light a smoke for him and lay it down on his tombstone, and promised him I wouldn't tell Grandma. And then, talking to him and just thanked him. This guy was just a downright misfit in the most beautiful and loving way that an individual could be.
That's my Uncle Rusty.
Uncle Spike, man, Uncle Fred he's in a retirement, in an elderly community. The thing that led him to, his last days, he hasn't been able to drive for years. He got caught smoking freebase about 15 years ago by my uncle. And so they pulled his license and got him, they're like, you can't be doing this shit, Fred. And so this was not his normal habit, but it was just something that had happened, and it was just kind of funny that you wouldn't expect this man in his 70s to be doing. This sweet man in his 70s to be doing. And so Uncle Fred...
Well, I mean, he was young once.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was. So he'd been riding his bike, for a decade and a half everywhere he went, and he didn't allow the lack of the driver's license to slow him down. He just started riding his bike everywhere. And so he eventually ends up, where he's got needs help taking care of himself. And the injury that led him to his last few days on this planet was he was setting up his bike to go head out for the day, and a couple of the gals were out front, and he decided he was going to show off for him. So he starts hauling ass and tries to bunny hop off of the the planter box onto the parking lot for these gals, and he blew it and he wiped out. He messed his leg up so that
and at 70 years old, that's hard to recover from.
Oh man, he didn't either. That was ultimately the injury that led him to, he was bedridden, and this is an active guy, and inactivity did not serve him. And so he, it ended up being a thing where his money is kind of his money was running out. He wasn't really able to draw up on any more funds. He was going to end up having to live with, Grandma or something. And he, it was just kind of Fred, you haven't got much money left. You haven't got really any place to go. And it just kind of seemed like God had a place for Uncle Fred to go.
Yeah.
Died in his sleep painlessly.
That's pretty awesome. Whiling out to the last day,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm charging my phone here, so I'm getting down. Anyway, so yeah, Uncle Fred. Anyways, I just kind of rabbit holed there a little bit. I'm visiting Uncle Fred, and had I not stopped to visit Uncle Fred, I wouldn't have pulled out of the cemetery and ended up right alongside a guy that I used to do finishing carpentry with, who we sort of had a falling out. It just was not a savory departure. And I look over and I'm like, holy smokes, that's him. And I hit the horn and I get a good signal from him. And so I call him. And, in AA, we have something we call the amends process. So I call him, I make amends, which basically is forget the whatever part of it was his. I need to communicate to him where I was wrong. And I need to let
you own your part.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that you're owning your role.
I need to take care of my side of the street. I need to ask him if there's anything that he thinks I may have left out, and I need to ask him if there's anything that I can do to make up for that. And my experience with making amends with people is 9 times out of 10 they're so blown away at like what you're telling them that they're like, no, of course, no, it's good. I've never.
Yeah.
My grandmother Margaret, who is a gosh darn saint, is the only person who I've ever made an amends to. She had a few questions for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So leave
it to older people. They don't.
What is it?
Oh, I was saying leave it to older folks. Like they've been through everything. Their bullshit meter is full. They'll give it to you.
She says, so you mean that time you borrowed $40 to buy bike tires on the bike that you had a bike on? You spent it on drugs? Yes, Grandma, that's what I'm telling you. So yeah, made the amends. We just went jogging together Thursday night. Guy who was this guy was. We had a good relationship, so it was really nice to rekindle that. And I just wouldn't have run into him. That I wouldn't even have crossed my mind if I hadn't been leaving the cemetery at that exact time. I wouldn't have been at the cemetery if I hadn't been at the fence company, and I wouldn't have been at the fence company if I hadn't watched Uncle Bill's funeral that morning, and I wouldn't have watched Uncle Bill's funeral if I hadn't been over there printing something and left my Google account up. So
butterfly effect.
Unusual equation sometimes how things happen.
Well, that song "God Bless This Open Road" or the Broken Road. There's a lot to be said about that. Like, I think that's one of the things, personally, I think that when you start showing a sign of maturity is when you can look at your past and say, yeah, I fucked up, but I wouldn't change it.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, I try to impart on people that growth comes from humility, right? And so you have to own the tough things, the bad things, the mistakes, that when you were just clearly fucked up in what you were doing. And be humble about it and own it, or you're going to repeat those same things, So I feel
like you were saying,
like
tripping over the shoelaces over and over again.
Yeah. I've had the things in my past so that I can really understand my part in them and understand how it impacted other people so that I don't repeat those things with anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, humility is vitamin H, man. That's all I can say. It has been it has been like miracle grow in my experience for just my own personal development. And just it has been miracle grow. I mean, humility and acceptance and just the willingness to, alchemy is an ancient process in which we're, if you've heard about it, we automatically think of turning lead into gold. This is like, we think of like Merlin and the wizard and like he's turn lead into gold, and turning lead into gold is something that is, anytime I've been in jail and gotten out, it's the time that I've spent in there I've always been grateful for. The situation with our daughter who, never took a breath, that's led into gold. I mean, that has been a situation that has been invaluable to us. So
yeah, when I go through rough times, and I don't know when I got blessed enough to get this mindset, but I don't do the self-pity thing. Like I can't do the self-pity thing. It's just not my programming. But what I do is, and to help rectify it in my life, in my head, is I ask myself, what's the lesson that the universe is trying to teach me in this? And sometimes, because I could be living what a lot of people think is kind of a righteous life. Like I'm doing right by everybody else. I'm being honest. I'm clean. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. And then bad shit just happens. And sometimes that lesson is Humility. Like, you just need to be taken down. Like, even if you're living right, like, it doesn't, you gotta sometimes dial shit back a little bit, you know. But there's lessons that can be found in everything as long as you seek out those lessons.
Yeah, there's no insurance policy, man.
Nah,
There just isn't.
for sure.
Get that. Yeah, a big one for me, surrender. Surrender is huge. For me, God, I just don't, you know, I mentioned being an Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was in my 20s, I had 5 years, clean and sober, been in the program. I believe I talked about it in the last podcast a bit. I was in a position where I was the director of a facility that was a resident. I basically ran a house that had 26 men all dealing with drug addiction. You know what I mean? And these guys, this was not like you come in, take your meds, you know what I mean? Take a trip to the day to the beach. This was like you get your ass up in the morning, eat breakfast, and it's just action, 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 structure, action. And every minute, like leaving a cup out, there is a repercussion for that. There's a repercussion for that. There's a repercussion for using, a racial slur or something that would a derogatory term based upon somebody's sexuality. I mean, just any just negative way of living. It just was totally
like extreme discipline. It sounds like.
Yeah, lots of structure, lots of discipline, and not only like you get talking to like these guys. Like a 300, 500,000 word essay would be in place for each individual infraction. And and I somehow ended up as the ringleader, like the guy in charge of this program, so that the owner could go out to Kentucky and open another one, and I had 5 years. It was probably like the 5 years of my 20s that was the only one that made sense. And I ultimately decided to go when I moved back up here to Sacramento. This was down in LA. I moved back up here to Sacramento and I started smoking herb and drinking and doing the thing again. And I spent 8 years swearing I would, for whatever reason, swearing I would never go back to AA, swearing that it was all bullshit, that I was not an alcoholic. And I spent 8 years biting the dust, and it was so bizarre, man. Like eventually one day, it was actually my sobriety date is actually my birthday too. Like my, birthday.
Yeah.
It just happened that way. And it was so bizarre, I made the decision, even though I thought that this AA thing was dumb. And I just figured I was I figured I possessed all this wisdom that I just didn't need it. I was beyond it or something. And
you know what they say, when you're young and dumb, you do things that are young and dumb.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
What, the day that I decided to pick that book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book, back up and open up to the first part, which is entitled The Doctor's Opinion, it was like electric. Traveled off of that page in through my hands back into my body, and it was like I woke up from an 8-year-long nightmare, man. Like came out of an 8-year-long coma. It was the most bizarre thing. So it didn't make sense intellectually. It wasn't what was in my heart, and it wasn't what I wanted to do physically. But when I surrendered my opinions and I opened that book up, all of the medicine went right where it needed to go, man. I've been sober ever since. So, and it wasn't the sobriety. The thing about alcoholism isn't I drink every day. Alcoholism isn't I get up at 3:30 in the morning and drink. Alcoholism isn't I'm snorting crank so that I can drink more. Alcoholism is when I stop doing drugs and when I stop drinking, these are the parts of myself that I am left with, is alcoholism. Mm-hmm. Is what I'm left with when I take all the chemicals out of the picture. And so and I knew that, but I didn't because it wasn't until I surrendered that I recalled that, like, I need this thing. I need this medicine, you know? And the ego is insane within me. I can only speak for myself. Like, the ego that exists within I is just, it's outrageous. It's outrageous how stubborn and how selfish and just how
ego holds us back. Absolutely. Ego will hold us back. If the second we start thinking that we're bigger than, better than, greater than, we're just putting blinders on, right? Like, and I think, like, when you said, like, when you surrendered, right, that goes back to what we were saying about humility, right? You have to have humility to surrender. You can't surrender without humility. Like, they don't go. And that's really hard, especially, I think, growing up. And it sounds like we haven't covered, might have covered it in your previous episode, your history growing up. But I mean, being a provider, it sounds like, in your relationship and having, physical jobs and being the one who goes out there and chases the check down and being I don't think you said it, but alluded to, like, kind of the protector of the family. These are that is culturally, here at least in the United States, it is counterintuitive to surrender to anything when you hold yourself up to that, right? So to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm a red, white, and blue American too. I get it. Yeah, that's totally how I feel most things. You know.
And it's right? Like we've talked.
That's not what we built the country on.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, we've talked a lot about it on the show about the effects of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And that's how I grew up. Like, I grew up really rough, fighting multiple times a week. Like, it was like it was school for gladiators, the way that I was growing up. And back then I couldn't ever imagine surrendering to anything. Like, that was not my vocabulary. That's something that happened to weak people in movies. Realizing,
that's a loss. You're taking a loss then.
Yeah.
Not realizing that also it takes more strength to surrender than it does to keep this facade of strength and stoicism going. Right.
Yeah.
But
it's like, one thing that needs to be said is that, yeah, there is toxic masculinity, but not all masculinity is toxic. It takes it takes a hell of a man to be able to understand when you need to take that step back, when you need to surrender, when you need that lesson to be taught. That is masculinity right there, and that's the good kind.
Honey,
and I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm still super guilty of toxic masculinity. I'm like you were talking a little bit earlier.
Hey, there's the wife.
You were talking a little bit earlier about getting into getting into trouble, throwing hands. Like, I like to think I'm an enlightened person now, but let something happen where that subject needs to come up, and I'll still go to it. It's not anything that just ever goes away, but we can try to grow from it.
And I want to say that when you were talking about when you opened up your AA book, Kat's response to your reaction to it was, she's like, "Wow, that's extra." So yeah, I just want to throw that out there.
The electric.
Yeah, when you said that when you opened up the book, it was like electric when you got the doctor's diagnosis.
It's indescribable experience that I'll tell you what, man, I smoked a couple really strong doses of DMT in my day, and that was a pretty electrifying experience, but it was nothing compared to what happened when I surrendered and opened up my Alcoholics Anonymous book this last time.
And out of curiosity, how long has that been? You said you've been sober since.
It's been recent. It's been I've been involved sort of like with the notion of needing to be free of chemical influence, or it's been, I feel like I've been talking about it for a couple of years now, definitely since the last time I was on the show. But as far as actually getting like directly re-involved in AA, it's been since 2023. This has been a fairly recent commitment. It's been it's been a great year so far. Let me say that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome starting it off strong. Yeah, Sarah was saying earlier that she grew up in the Alateen,
yeah. And I went to it too when I was a kid. Yeah, my parents are both in AA as well.
Yeah, it's and they have some flavor of AA for whatever you're struggling with. You know, they have it for like, you know, the narcotics, and they have it for overeating. They have it for
Bling,
a lot.
Cigarettes, sex and relationships,
gambling.
I think they have one for
screen time.
They have one for if you're a dumbass. I think it's called Dumbasses Anonymous. I've been trying to find a meet local, and I just can't seem to find one. But I could use that one too. Knuckleheads Anonymous.
Have you been to Gullible People's Anonymous?
I would be a candidate.
You and me both.
I bust a leak real quick. Can you guys give me a moment?
Sure thing.
Thank you. I'll be right back.
Yeah, Sarah put in a couple of comments here in chat.
Yeah.
Where we were talking about toxic masculinity. She said, "You relish being a man and your ability to step in front of and protect someone that's not toxic. And you do not look down on with your masculinity. You look over people with it. You don't think it limits anyone else." Yeah, but I think I think the toxic masculinity that's still alive in me is all internal, like the way that it causes me to push myself, in probably sometimes unhealthy ways. Like my self-talk has gotten a lot better. I think you're paying attention to your self-talk is super important. Like when you mess something up, are you telling yourself, "Come on, you can do this"? Or are you saying that, you know, "Damn it, why am I such a fuck up"? Like those are some major clues.
Yeah.
Where your mindset is, right? And usually my self-talk is pretty good, but you know, I've been known to tell myself, like, if I'm just tired and I can't get up and do something, I'll be like, you know, "Stop being a pussy, get it done." You know, that self-talk is not always the greatest.
No.
You know, and that comes from the toxic masculinity that lives within me.
And a good way to kind of look at it too is like when you're talking about where Sarah mentioned about stepping in front of and protecting someone. Doing that when the situation calls for it, that's masculinity. Looking for that situation to do it, that's toxic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we've had those conversations. Like if I went to a bar now, which like doesn't happen, and somebody took a swing at me, and even if they connected, I'd be like, "Yo, bro, are you okay? You need a hug? Can I buy you a drink? Like, you want to talk about it?" But if somebody put hands on one of my friends that are there, I'm gonna beat the brakes off them. Like, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't.
And that's not toxic. But if you're going to the bar specifically looking for a fight and wait for one to break out, I consider that toxic.
Yeah.
Can I share a reading from the Tao Te Ching with you guys real quick?
Yeah, please.
And then
absolutely.
I think I have a treat that you guys are going to really appreciate here in a second. Can I share this reading with you really quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's see. Kat in chat said, "I tried Overeaters Anonymous long ago, but the group in my area at the time was too Jesus orientated for me." Yeah, that can be hard when there's more faith and when it's more about faith than the process. It can turn a lot of people off. It's one of the requirements of going to those anonymous groups is you don't necessarily need to be all about Jesus, but you do need to believe in a higher power, because that's where a lot of that comes from.
Right.
In the AA?
Or that whole 12-step program kind of thing is geared around.
Yeah.
There is a force bigger than you.
Belief in a higher power.
You can definitely, let me tell you this, you can most certainly be an atheist and benefit just as much as I from these programs.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the community there.
Yeah.
is pretty amazing.
This is something that was I've been reading through this Tao Te Ching. It has like 80 something, or I don't. It's got a bunch of different entries, and I think it's ideally you read them in order. What I do is I don't really have like a program around it. I just, when I think of it, I pick up the book and I read whatever the next page is. And I'm on 58. Well, I'm on like 60, but this is one that I read recently that I think is relevant to the toxic masculinity topic. But it says, so this is 58 alternatives. And of course, in the spirit of masculinity, it's got this giant mountain poking up out of this giant phallus poking up out of the naturally. Sometimes I trip out on the image. Each page has its own image, and there are these beautiful, beautiful landscape images. And I just feel like if you sit there and if you trip on the image after you read the entry, the image goes in one sense or another right along with the material. So this is number 58 in the Tao Te Ching. It's called Alternatives. It reads, when a government is more benign, the people are more productive. When a government is more tyrannical, the people are more rebellious. But whatever the government, if disaster is the bitter fruit of others' good fortune, how long can such injustice be tolerated? How long we have endured the hypocrisies. Those pretending to be righteous sometimes act deceitfully, and those pretending to be religious sometimes revert to evil. We have been deluded, and each day it becomes worse. Be firm and armed, but do no harm. Be as sharp as a knife, do not cut. Be ready to transform, but do not provoke. And illuminate the darkness of ignorance, but do not blind.
I like that.
Good stuff, huh?
That was
absolutely.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk? You guys want to talk to my wife about the healing process?
We are. Well, don't. We're already halfway through our podcast at this point. I mean, we can. But it might be.
We would love to have her for her own show.
Yes,
if she'd be willing. Yeah, because I don't think we can give her the time that she deserves.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's my concern.
What we have left.
That's fair. She's got a pump. She's getting ready to feed the baby and everything. Anyway, I just figured I'd throw it out there. She was willing.
Yeah. No, we definitely will.
Get her on the show.
Yeah, we want her on the show.
Yeah, super appreciative. Absolutely.
We have an opening in 2 weeks. I know that off the top of my head.
There we go.
Next week's book, but we're open in 2 weeks. Now, to kind of go along with what you just said, though, here was one of my friends posted this meme, and I replied to it, and so what it said was, my biggest fear is that eventually you will see me for the way I see myself. And my reply was, that's the problem, though. You have a distorted self-image. You can't see the forest for all the trees. Maybe see yourself for how those that love you see you. You value their opinions and judgments, right? Pause. I should probably try this on myself. It's one of those things where sometimes, like, I'm good at giving the advice. I know what to say. I've been through enough therapy. But damn, sometimes it's hard to take it, even though you know it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah and I were talking about this today or yesterday, where the being able to be great at giving life advice, not following your own. It's like the way I describe it is because when you're helping other people out, you can see the full story that's in front of you. But when you're in the story, it's like trying to read a book with your nose pressed on the page. Nothing's in focus. When you hold that book at arm's length, you could start to read it. Yep. Nick's reading kind of made me think. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's a lot of people think power is the ability to do harm, but where power comes in is having the ability to do harm and choosing not to. Right. It's.
And also, Nick, just so you know, that when we first mentioned bringing your wife on, we got a message in our group chat that we have for the podcast, because there's a number of us involved. Sarah saying, I want to co-host that episode. So she even went, and then when you were talking about bringing her on, she went into the main chat on the channel and said, no.
Yeah. So I'll be stepping out for that one so she can fill in.
You guys will love her. You guys will be like, we forget that guy. She's the one we were supposed to have on the show.
No. The way I've always looked at it is good people attract good people. And you are good people, so your wife is probably good people. I can't see good people sticking around with bad people long term like that. I see it for a short while trying to fix someone, but I can't see it sticking out and working through it. And you guys have gotten stronger through adversity. That's good people.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys have grown a lot together. And through that adversity, you've grown a lot together as individuals, as a couple. It sounds like when other people, they would have just grown apart from it. So that's definitely being blessed right there.
Yeah, you're the second example I have in my personal life of seeing where adversity brought people closer. My mom suffered a traumatic head injury. My mom and dad are closer now than they were before it. When most people would be like, yo, it's been 10 years now. 10 years. My mom's...
Your mother?
Yeah, my mother. She's good, but she will never be who she once was. It's just, that's not in the cards for her. Not with the nature of the injury. And no one would have blamed my dad had he left. And we are also thankful that he didn't. My mom would have blamed him. Hands down, she would have blamed him. But yeah, no, you guys went through a situation that a lot of couples can't handle, and you're stronger for it, and that's awesome. That's inspiring.
Thank you. I'm glad. I appreciate that.
So, you have anything else you want to say?
Let's see.
I got one last question for you.
Sure.
Being on the backside of everything that you endured, and there had to be thinking about you in that situation when you first experienced that loss. There had to be a lot of confusion, it felt like chaos. I can only imagine. In case somebody who's listening has had to go through the same thing, or may have to endure it in the future, what advice would you give yourself today? What advice would you give the you of that day from what you've learned?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. And
how do you sum up all the lessons? Right?
I have to be honest. I don't know. I don't know what I would. That situation was such an anomaly, and you don't like we've said, all of us have said in our own way more than once, is that you just don't really know how to deal with it. And I would, if I had been in a situation in which I was not willing to just surrender to what was happening in reality and go forth and do just the best I could based upon what my intuition was telling me. And if the word intuition is not familiar, then just the little feelings that seem to be presenting themselves from the inside out. I followed those. If I could go back in if I could give that guy a little more advice, I would say, if anything, just dive into it more. Dive into the part that hurts the most. Dive into the part that makes you not want to get out of bed, and just really, because that's ultimately, the deeper and deeper I got into considering, what's on one hand, what's on the other, and just, there, I finally just ended up, like, what the big turning point for me in that scenario was, I was driving to, my primary job is in Ione, which is,
That's a hike.
Just shy of an hour southeast of, Citrus Heights. Driving through the hills of Ione one day, I was listening to Oriental flute music. I don't know how relevant that was, but it was just this beautiful music, this beautiful yet so sad kind of music that taught a lesson, like a sonic lesson. It taught a sonic lesson. There was no lyrics. It was all flute. And it hit a different part of my heart and my soul. And there's nobody out there but cows and stuff. And I rolled my window down, and I just started screaming at the top of my lungs while I was crying. It's just like, and that final just kind of meltdown I had while I'm like, driving on this windy country road. And I just screamed my daughter's name. And it was just, that was the moment that I think that the tide sort of turned. And it was just through a direct divulgence into the pain and the things that I was feeling on the inside. And it just created a physical manifestation ultimately of what was going on within me. And that really was diving into what hurt, and what was seemingly like, the natural inclination is to sort of shy away from, or not negate, but sort of take the edge off of, either intellectualize feeling,
it's like, that hurt, need to stop.
It sounds like your choice to surrender allowed you to release.
Surrender, precisely.
To surrender to it, to experience it, to dive in, to feel it, to not try to hide from it, led you to the point where you were able to finally exhale. That scream was an exhale after holding your breath for a really long time.
I agree. And Sarah had a good question, then I have one last question as well.
Sure.
Sarah said, did you spend a lot of time sitting with it in the car as opposed to listening to music with lyrics, or what have you?
I go through, I drive in silence a lot less lately. Lately, I've been, I've been a little more upbeat, the last, I'd say 3 months or so. This is probably, I think it was about a year after the thing happened, around, late November was when the cry in the wilderness happened. And, since then, I've been a lot more upbeat and listening to a lot more stuff in the car, talks and music and stuff. And, but, prior to that, I was driving a lot in silence.
I was going to say, it sounds like that event was like you lanced the wound and drained it.
I would wholeheartedly agree with you. Yeah.
And my question is, your other children, how did they handle all this? How did you guys deal with their experience? Because I could imagine it was traumatic for them too.
My son, who's a teenager, was heartbroken. It was really, this is a kid who's been through a lot of heartbreaking stuff. Okay. I would venture to say in 13 years, he's been through some extremely adverse dealings, you know, and he's like, the kid's like my hero in a lot of ways, but he had it. He was very wounded by this, you know. He was very sad. He is a very unusually inclined towards small children, you know, like kids gravitate to, especially, he's very like, he's the, you know, when you're a little kid and you got a bigger kid that treats you as an equal, that is huge. I don't know if you guys remember.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I never really had that myself, except for one neighbor. I'm the oldest in my generation, so I was that to all of my cousins.
Yeah, see, to an extent, I was as well. I had one older buddy, the neighborhood kid too. Yeah, but he was really shook by that thing. The little guys, I don't really know. You know, they were so small. I mean, they knew that there was supposed to be a baby coming home, and
so they may have that youth as a blessing of they won't have permanent memories of this.
I don't know, man. But you know, I think what was a trip is then, you know, when baby Hiram's name originally was going to be SEA, like the, you know, like the sea. Which was actually an inspiration from a novel that I'm writing, a character in the novel, and that has kind of been a story that has developed within me since I was approximately 22 years old. And at the last minute, we agreed on the name Hiram. Adon Hiram, or the king of Tyre, is the individual he's the architect who built Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, ancient Jerusalem. So baby there was kind of this baby that was supposed to come home, but I always kept thinking, like, did they really know what we're talking about? Because the last time that a baby was supposed to come home, mom came home without a baby. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I really don't know what their experience was like on that matter, you know?
Well, if you don't mind asking, how old are they?
Well, they're almost 3 and 4 and just turned 4 now. One thing I will say, though, maybe not their experience, but those two little guys were probably the most powerful source of therapeutic medicine, other than the strengthening and the nourishing of my wife and I's relationship from the experience. Just those little guys were like, you got to imagine, like, just the appreciation for having those two after what had happened was just like, oh God, you know, I mean, it was just, they were like babies all of a sudden.
I mean, when that happened, they were 2 and 3. So for them, yeah, life goes on. And you can learn from that. And because you have those kids, life had to go on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it, you know, like I began with what I stand by, you know, when we started out, is that it was the most unusual and just most, seemingly unintuitive gift that I have ever been given in my entire life. I'd say alcoholism and my daughter Maya Leela have been the most, what you know, may perceivably be considered as a curse, that have proven to be two of the greatest blessings in my entire life.
Yeah, Nick, honestly, I'm so glad that we've met. You know, you do inspire me. You do.
Likewise.
I'm glad that you came back on the show. I'm glad you opened up about this. I know this is not an easy topic for, like, there's people out there that they would never share this. So glad that you're on.
Couldn't.
Definitely looking forward to having your wife on. to get her side of the story, because that'll be one of the first times that we've had the two sides of the same event on the podcast, which is, I mean, that's just cool in its own right. But I think it would be great for at least our listeners to hear her side of the story, and it might be good for her too to be able to share it and get that out too. Because as you know, this when you do an episode, it's cathartic. You write a little buzz for a couple of days off of it.
Yeah, I would say so.
So yeah, definitely thank you again. I'll contact you like right after we get done with this. We'll go ahead and start talking about booking your wife.
Sarah says thank you so much for sharing your story with us in chat.
Definitely.
It is my pleasure. It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on again.
Definitely. And you have an open invite. You're just, I'm sure there's more stories that you have that you could share. Because, I mean, you've lived life. I'll say that. All right. So, again, thank you, Nick. Until next week, I'm E.
I'm off.
One love, guys. Thank you so much. Bless you. God bless you. Until then.
Inside.